Should we start with just Kevin? I've assumed you're driving, by the way.
I'm happy to. I think.
Fair?
Yeah, I'll drive.
I just thought we would just recap what UI Examples is, in case not everyone knows, apart from being an incredibly useful and wonderful package to help you see how things work in the back office. In terms of, do you just want to show us what's in there? We haven't even managed to get it on NuGet yet, but that's
you're testing me already, because I don't know if the version 9, I don't know if the copy I've got is working, because it's a copy of the site.
Oh.
So I've taken a different copy from the one I normally work on, so it might not be set up. So let's just see what happens when I start it.
But we have a main branch V8 package that is on our Umbraco, not yet on NuGet, but should be.
Okay, I'm assuming you can see a bit of my screen and not my whole screen.
You can see, yes.
You can see that browser.
We can see a boot.
Yellow.
The good old boot failed.
Well, this is good, because the way this repo is set up is because it's a just an Umbraco thing. It's got the database in, but if we just delete the version number and the connection string, we can reinstall it. Hopefully, because I've taken a copy, because obviously I've got a working copy, but I've taken I'm just working in a different folder because I didn't want to overwrite that. So.
You see, I've learned something already. I've been spending time clearing out the value in connection string and the value in the provider.
In order to kick off an Umbraco 8 reinstall, you just need to remove the version number, configuration status, and the DSN.
Oh, I thought I've been assuming that you had to leave the name, the add name, blah, 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 and just blank out the values.
That will build you a site.
It's wasted seconds of my life.
It has. I'm wasting seconds as I'm installing the starter kit, which we didn't need to do, but
I'm also doing what I think is called filling while we watch an install screen.
Yes.
So,
because you wanted the demo of it. I'll tell you what I'll do as well. Let's not check my email on the screen.
That's not Kevin. Yeah. Unless it's all the, you think so good. Lovely
I don't even know which thing I'm on. Anyway, UI Examples is just a package that adds a section to Umbraco. And that's actually the code we'll do today. And then it's a almost purely AngularJS app plugin that just gives you an overview of some of the elements that you can use in Umbraco 8. So, for example, how an umbox works, and then that links to the documentation to show you how you would mark up your code with that. So, obviously, for package developers, this is great for being able to build your pages to look like Umbraco. So we've got like how to use the confirm dialog boxes, how to do a custom overlay that might step through. And this is all the JavaScript that's in there. So this stuff, and a very useful where the icons are page. This stuff does not change in V9. So actually the majority of this project will continue to work in version 9 as is. If there was a way of saying the package was compatible, we could just port the app plugins into an Umbraco package and into a NuGet package and deploy it, and it would work. But what you wouldn't get, and what the need to do a conversion, is the UI examples section is added. So there's a piece of code in here that adds the UI Umbraco section to the admins on startup. So you just saw I did a fresh install and I got UI examples. So actually the code that we're going to step through to turn it into a V9 package is the code that runs a composer and a component to add a section via a migration to an Umbraco site. And so what we'll do is turn that into the V9 version of that, which is slightly different in the startup methods, but ultimately we will run a migration which will add the UI examples section. But what we're hopefully going to achieve is that multi-targeted. So that means that the same DLL compiles for .NET 4.7.2 and .NET 5, and the package, so the NuGet package at the end, contains the .NET 4.7.2 and the .NET 5 DLL and files, and therefore can be installed either on version 8 or version 9, because obviously they're different versions of .NET.
So does that mean then that we're going to stick with our main repository branch, and we'll have because we've got a sample site in here, haven't we? The V8 site.
Yes, I think we have. So this repo at the moment, this is what it is. It's got our Umbraco UI examples, which is the package with the app plugins folder and the migration code. So the code to migrate that into it's a code to add that section. Essentially, that's the code, and then we've got our package file. At the end of this project will be multi-targeted, so our Umbraco UI examples will be multi-targeted. We will have a UI examples website, which will be the current .8 site, and we'll add a V9 sample site to the project. So the project will have 2 sample sites, so you can see how it works on V9 and how it works on V8. They obviously don't have to be in your repo when you do a package, but I just think it's easier to have them there. And then this code will be the thing, and we'll build it into a single package file that can be distributed.
Okay, ready, steady, go.
Okay, so let's close some stuff. So,
I'm kidding, it's not a race.
No race. So the first thing you're going to do, your multi-target, is if you've got fortunately for us, we built this in the new package format. So if you create a project now, I would say that even for Umbraco 8, the way to create an Umbraco library is if you do a new, so I'm not going to do this, but if you do a new project, is to actually do, even if you're doing for Umbraco 8, do a new class library. You'd give it a name. And you see it says .NET 5 current, you leave a .NET 5 current and create that as an empty class library, even if you're doing an Umbraco 8 site, because it gives you this format. And what it actually would say is .NET 5 there. You change it to .NET 4.7.2, and you can use the new format on old code. And that means when you come to do this, you don't have to convert your project, which is quite complicated. And when I've done it, what I've actually ended up doing is creating a new .NET, a project with the new format, and copying the files in is the quickest way to end up with a clean project format. Because a Visual Studio project, the old one, this is a really massive file, not as small as you can see here. So the first thing you do to make it multi-targeted is you put an S on target frameworks. And when you save that, it'll complain. And you do a semicolon, and you do net 50. And that's what you do to make, and then you reload the project. That's what you do to make a project multi-targeted in Microsoft. So that now will say, this will now compile for .NET 4.7.2 and .NET 5.0. But it will immediately fail because we are trying to include Umbraco in .NET 5, .NET 4. So the other thing you have to do for .NET is you have to say, I want to use Umbraco 8 in .NET 4 and Umbraco 9 in .NET 5. And so the way to do that is to add a target framework attribute to your item groups. So here, condition, and I've pasted this in, so watch this magic. Boomf. That says only include this group when the target framework is .NET 4.7.2. So now, if you look at, we save that, and we look at the dependencies, you'll see that on the package we've got Umbraco as a dependency there, but we haven't got Umbraco as a dependency here. So if we want to do the same for, in fact, let's just copy it. Want to do the same for what we want .NET 5 version to have Umbraco 9 in it. We change that to .NET 5. And again, because I don't want to have to type all this in, we change the references to the .NET Umbraco 9. Now, there's 2 of these, and I'm not 100% sure whether you need both, but I think for this project we do, because we're doing some section stuff, which is web. So these are the equivalent. When you do package development, you do .web or .core. So you get the core and the web DLLs. These are the equivalent in .NET 9. So the .NET Umbraco 9. So you get the website one and the back office one. And if I save that, you'll see that that now adds the Umbraco 9 references and eventually loads them. So this, you can obviously do that with the package command line. You can do install package. I don't know how to do that with target framework as a command line to that, but you can add them here and then add the condition. And essentially that now, from a Visual Studio point of view, is a multi-targeted project that will include Umbraco 8 for .NET 4 and Umbraco 9 for .NET 9. And if you build it, it will fail, which is what you expect, because now you're getting loads of errors. And this is because the code doesn't reference .NET 9. So we can actually, the first thing to do is sort of step through. So when you multi-target, a thing to note is that in Visual Studio, you get a little drop down in the top left, which tells you which version you're looking at. So here it says I'm looking at Umbraco.NET 4.7.2. So this is the .NET 4 version of the page. And if I do that, it compiles as if it's compiling for .NET 5. And you see I get all the red lines because I've got the wrong version of Umbraco installed. So what we essentially want to do is upgrading it. And this might not be the best one to start with. Let's just see. Which one am I on? Yeah, this one isn't the best one to start with. Let's do the migration plan. So the .NET 4.5 version of the migration plan, dead simple page, isn't working because it can't find Umbraco core migrations. So just using Visual Studio, we can say, well, actually, we need that other one. And you can see now that one's in, but we're getting a red line. So this is where we have to define what gets used for each framework. So you're just using the preprocessor compile commands. I think they're called preprocessor. You can say, if I'm doing a .NET Core app, include this. Else, so that's because we're only doing that, it's a framework, include this. And what that essentially says is if we're doing migrations in .NET Core, this is the namespace, and this is it. And this is the majority of when you're doing multi-targeted, you end up with this on most of the files that are Umbraco files, the if-def to define one to the other. So you can see if you can see that that's grayed out because I'm looking at .NET 5, and I've flicked that, it's the other way around, and it actually looks fine. We're getting an error because this doesn't really exist yet because we haven't done the same to that migration file. So essentially what we need to do is go through these 4 files and change them to all be able to compile both ways. There's a couple of other things we'll need to do on the way, but that's essentially how we get it from .NET file to both. So
just to ask Kevin,
yeah,
you put these if, else, and ifs anywhere in the code. So say
yes,
the migration plan class name had changed, you would put it around the. You
can, and in fact, I think I'll do the migration one next, which is we'll just follow the red lines, as it were.
Red road, yeah.
Yeah, we'll follow that. So it's the same here. Not sure where hash is then. So you can see now we've got the same thing, and we're just going to have to do the same. Now, when you do it first time, it's not clever enough to put that in the right place. But I found once you've done one, it seems to be able to find them better. Although, actually, this isn't going to find any because none of this stuff's done. This is the example we're talking about. So in here, you can see, even though we've added that, we'll ignore these 3 for a minute, we're still getting a red line on the inherit. Now, what happened in one of the later versions of Umbraco 9 release is the signature of this has changed. So it's not a public anymore. I believe. I'll just comment it out a sec.
I think it's protected.
It's become protected. So it's exactly the same in every other way, except it's public versus protected. So as you were saying, Andy, what you can actually do, and this isn't as super neat, but you can do this. End of. So you can do that, and essentially now that bit doesn't error. And we've got this because that was added by my override. So now we've got the same thing because the signature changed. This obviously, that would mean if you were doing migrations, you might end up with that loads of times. So what I've done in another project is overridden migration base once and then used it for all my migrations so that I don't have to do an if-def every single time I want to do a migration. But yeah, that's an example. You can do it anywhere, and you often might end up with that, especially if the constructor's changed, which I think it has for the way migration plans work. For simplicity, let's just get rid of the context logger lines because for not staff, they're not ideal because they're context lines, and that's changed quite a bit. So that gets you to this point now. Post-migration is more of an Umbraco 8 thing, and to be honest, we didn't need to do this like post-migration. What it means is technically a migration should really only talk about the database and not do other things like interact with Umbraco services. But that was pre some of the changes made early on in 8, and what we did is the post-migration. So if I go to that, what the post-migration does is it connects to the Umbraco context. It finds the admin group, so that's what this line's doing, and then it adds an allowed section with a function that just adds the UI examples section to the admin user. And we do that as post-migration, but we really don't need to. And for the sanity of this code, it's easier if we don't do this as a post-migration and we just do it in a migration. So what I'm going to do now is lift this bit of code up and move it into that migration so that we've got one less file to worry about and one less file to compare to. So that's the migration plan. This is the migration. So instead of having that add post migration there, I'm just going to have the whole bit of code. But we will now have to do a bit of constructor work because we've included stuff that wasn't there previously. So that piece of code will find a scope, needs a scope provider, a user service, and the Umbraco context to work, which means we do need to change the constructor up here to do the dependency injection, which we had. No, that's wrong, isn't it? We had previously. Already got too many files. Here, you can see that we've already got them. So we need to inject this bit into that other class. So we'll just copy them because we're basically merging these two files for simplicity. And then I need to add them to this. I'm going to skip login. I'll talk about it, but I'm deliberately skipping it because it's the hardest thing. Because the signature for login has changed quite a lot. So when you do login in Umbraco 8, you do it, as you can see here, you pass either a profile logger in or a normal logger. And then you do log, whereas in 9, there's the Umbraco log, the Microsoft logging service does it. And that has a slightly different signature. So doesn't like that because I've missed a comma. Why doesn't it like? Oh, it's called context. So hopefully nothing's now red. So that's now the .NET 5 version of it and the .NET 4 version of that. Oh, that's red because I haven't included them. Oh, we got one red line. Oh, constants. Umbraco core. So just a quick sanity check that they're both there. Obviously, we're not using the login, so it's a bit upset. But essentially, this migration step is now the nice color both ways. And because we've basically taken this file out, this add section for admin post step out. I'm just going to delete it. But all we did was move the code into one. And that's just because post migration steps are slightly weird in 9, and it's easy just to do it in 1. So now we've got a migration step merged, and our plan is happy in both .NET 4 and 7. So the next thing, and sort of the bigger chunk, is the composer in 8 versus the composer in 9. So this is V8, obviously, and the way that works is you have a composer. This is a component composer, so that's the same as a composer that just adds a component. And then we have a component which runs and then runs the migration plan. Now in 9, you can still have composers and components, but I think the best practice is not to have a component and try to avoid composers if you can, because people like to add things in App Startup, but obviously a package needs to be able to start itself. So you still end up with a composer, but you don't run things in the component level, you run them based on notifications. So what we're going to do is take this and split it into something that runs on V8 using the component composer model and something that runs on V9 using a composer notification model, but does the same thing. So first thing for sanity is I am going to take the composer out, the component out of the composer file. So I've just got Visual Studio to put the component in its own file and the composer in its own file. And that's because this component we only want to work for .NET 4.7.2. And there are a number of ways you can do that in a project. So you can exclude this file in the project file and say it only works in 2. My personal thing is if you do this, you can at least see in your code why it's not working. So if you just say like that, that's what I've been doing personally, because while I could exclude it in the CS proj file, I would never know why it's not compiling or if something's going on. So in the rare cases where you need just a file just for one of them, you can just say this is a framework only version of the file, and it will build that. So that's now, if I go to F5, you see the whole thing should be grayed out because it's not a compiled file.
So if you exclude it, is it excluding it for the active target that you've got selected?
Yeah. So this
how does it look?
This isn't building because Net Framework is the target. So I'm currently on this thing saying what target. If you want to exclude it in the file, essentially you can put it in an item group, and you can say, I can't remember the exact syntax, but when you've got an item group with that condition, so actually you could sort of put it in here. You can say none, I think.
Oh, because of course you exclude in these rather than include.
Yeah. And so you can exclude in the project, but if you do that, it doesn't show you up here where it's excluded, because this isn't a multi-targeted version of your solution over here. And I did it once and then spent a good half an hour working at going, why isn't that working? And it's because the file was excluded in the project file. Whereas this, it's fairly obvious. You click on the file and you can see. And you might want a naming convention that says that's a netcall only file. I would try and avoid this. And because this is a simple example that only calls one thing, I think it's cleaner to do an excluded single file that does it. But in reality, you could just do it. You could sort of merge it together and then have not less called in the file. So that's our component, which is now a framework only. And this is our composer, which is very upset because it thinks we're running F5. So we're going to make this into something that will boot both versions of Umbraco. So we do that. Then we've kept our nice Umbraco 9 version. For Umbraco 5.
Umbraco 5?
Umbraco 9.NET 5. Let's call it the same thing. We might choose to get really clever with all of the if devs in a minute. But if we just say... I'm also not 100% sure that Netcore app is the best one. I don't know if you look when you see this. You get the choice of if net is all sorts of little things you might be able to see. One of them is net 4.6. It goes, so there's even net 5 or greater.
Haven't I seen Steve Temple talk about custom ones? So he uses, he's built one called Umbraco 8.
Yeah, I'm not sure because I don't know how you can tell when you build them whether it's a target. I suppose you change your target for Umbraco 8 and then you can do that. But for mine, I've just been using Netcore app. It might bite me in that they'll compile for 3, but given that it only compiles for what you tell it to in targets, as long as you're happy with what your targets are. So let me take your casings off UI. So this is, we're doing this .NET Core 5. Now, there is a couple of differences. So, for example, in .NET 4, I don't think a component composer exists, and the run level doesn't get applied to a composer in .NET 9, and Umbraco 9. You know what, I'm getting these sort of things. In Umbraco 9, a composer runs all the time, irrespective of run level. So you have to do the run level check at some other point. You can't exclude a composer. So the idea is the composer always runs. So you can see really the difference between the composer is actually this composer would pass an I composition and this one passes an I Umbraco builder. And so that's different. If you were trying to do the same thing, you could in fact have this bit as different because the signature is different and then run one way and the other. But because we've got that run level and we don't want to change the code too much, we'll do it as a composer. But what we're going to add in the composer now is instead of using a component to kick this off, we're going to use a notification handler. So in Umbraco, there's notification handlers for when things happen. And the one we want at this point is when the Umbraco application starts. So Umbraco does all its stuff, fires it up, and then Umbraco application start would happen, which is, and I'll get this wrong now, starting? No, it's not starting.
Yeah.
Starting. Usually if you miss by one, it's fine. So I've missed by more than one. It might not be starting. Oh, it's starting notification. It's got a nice short name. There you go. And then what we have to do here is add the thing that's going to be our notification, the class we haven't created yet. So we best go off and create that. Otherwise, we can't add the notification handler. And this is wrong as well, as this is just totally all over the place. It's builder.add notification handler. And then you say, I want an Umbraco starting notification that is going to run this function over here, which we haven't yet created. So we're going to create that class. Oh. So this is what happens. Your typing goes all west when you're doing it on a video.
Yeah. At least it wasn't the classic mistyping of that word that happens too often.
So you haven't seen the notification handlers. Essentially, you implement the interface. Starting app. This application. And then if we implement the interface, you get handle. So all notifications, you can have multiple notifications in one class. So you could also have your content saved, menu render, and you just get a different handle for each one. But essentially this will be called, this bit of code here will be called when the app starts up. So now that we've got that class, we can just quickly go back into our composer and bung it in there. And now that's that registered. So that's the equivalent of the bit below. Essentially, we will hit this notification handler when the app starts, and that's where we want to do our work. As to before, go on.
Just a suggestion, Kevin, as also if you want a like for that runtime attribute, if you need to do something that is not run in a different runtime state, and you can inject runtime state, and obviously then. Yeah,
I was about to do it into the notification handler, so that the notification handler does it. So what I was going to say is we do. This needs, obviously, if you look at sort of maybe end up side by side, which might not be great on the screen, but we'll see. If you look at this, we need to inject quite a few things to get the upgrader working. And actually, it's got a different signature in 9, so you'll also see that. But one of them, as Warren just said, is the runtime state. So runtime, it's state, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. So we need to just close this a sec so we can see the screen. So essentially, because that is something we have to check, we need to make our runtime state a thing. And so the very first bit of code is this. You can do if runtime state, and that's just for sanity.
I think it's .level.
It is. I was sort of hoping to get some form of intelligence, so I've obviously done something wrong. Yeah, oh no, you're right. It's .level. That's why I wasn't getting it. Yeah, and then runtime level .run, isn't it?
Yep.
Don't know why it's not happy with me. I've done something weird. Oh, I've missed an equal sign. I'm having a. Right, let's slow down. Runtime level equals runtime level dot run.
Should be.
I don't know why it doesn't like CMS core.
Kevin, it's to do with your namespaces because it thinks you're inside your Umbraco namespace. So you'd have to like prefix it.
Oh yeah, I am. That's annoying, isn't it? Like that.
Yeah. Well, if you included Umbraco CMS core, you can just have runtime level, whatever. Yeah.
I know. I've stopped doing this now because it trips me up. I could have spent half an hour on that. Just be there going, I don't know how that works.
I've hit that before.
Yeah.
Is it better to now use Umbraco one word if you wanted to do that?
It's if you've got Umbraco in your namespace, it can. I mean, you can get around it and say there's a couple of ways, but I just get stuck on it and then forget I've done it. So I'm just going to lift the upgrader, even though I know it's changed slightly. This is actually the only bit of code we need to run to do the migration the same way. So what you do is you pass in the upgrader and then you call an execute line. As you can see, it doesn't like this for a number of reasons. One is we haven't got all the values, but actually it's a different signature under .NET Core. So it takes a thing called a plan executor, the scope, and the key value service. So we need to inject them into ours. So yeah. Well, key service, wasn't it? And for consistency, I think we've got underscores on both of these. And then essentially I need to also inject them into this bit. And then hopefully, if I've included the right ones, no red squiggles. But this obviously is a .NET only file, .NET 5 only file, because that's the way we've decided to split it in this one. So just for our own sanity, we do that. And that, when it's 4, won't be that. So now we've got the composer, when it's .NET 5, does this, because it's simple. And for .NET 5, no, for .NET 5 does that, and for .NET 4, Umbraco 8 does that. And so I think that'll compile. That compiles. So now in theory, that's actually migrated because of how we don't need to touch the app plugins of this one because they are the same. That has migrated the code. What we can do now is we can put a .NET 5 project Umbraco site into this project, copy the files over and check it works. And then we can also talk about how we package it. And there's one little thing we have to do for packaging it. So let's add an Umbraco project.
So when you compile, I'm just doing that thing again. When you compile, it's compiling against all frameworks that you're targeting.
It's compiling against both. So sorry, I've got keyboard pains. Yeah, it compiles against both. I'll show you in a sec. So just specify the name. Is the name what I've just told it? Project name. I wanted to give it the same project name and website name, but I don't know. That's a. I'm just going to use CE on the Umbraco 9 project.
I think it's package name.
I think that field you just filled in is for.
Oh, wrong thing. Yeah. I don't know. Will that matter, do you think? I feel like we're moving.
No, I've not used that, but I think that's for when you're creating a. Yeah, well, what you're doing here, like a companion package, a companion website for the package you're building.
Oh, I think it might have included a script file that I didn't want. But anyway, just to show Lottie what happens when you build it in your project. The bin folder has 2 folders. So you've got a .NET 4.7 folder, which has got that in it, and your .NET 5 folder, which has got slightly different references, but that's your .NET 5 package, and your .NET 4 are copied in. I am now going to have to see what we've just done to the project because I don't know what we did there. Did you think it created the gulp file? It might well have created the thing I need anyway. So, but I didn't.
It's got a strange timestamp.
Yeah, is that the right? That's not even the right folder, is it? Open.
I mean, you could just delete it and do it again. No judgment here, Kevin.
No, I think I might have put them there. I don't know. We'll carry on and see what happens. We'll learn. So
deleting it didn't create it though. You're in trouble. Aren't you?
Well, we do need them, and it might be that I put them there. But I
can't 1024 was before this call started.
Yeah, that's weird. I'm only slightly concerned because I've got multiple versions of this on my disk. So. No, the gub files are actually when I copied it. They already exist. You can ignore me. They already exist for us because that's how we copy stuff off. So the way that this project works is that we have a gulp file which copies the app plugins folder to the web project. So whenever we update a file here in UI examples plugin, it copies it into the V8 site, and that's actually running. Well, it would be running if I'd installed Gulp. It runs in Visual Studio in the background, and you don't see it happen. So it's just sort of like a nice, easy way of keeping the thing going, essentially. But that doesn't, because when you change a file that way, you don't need to change. Sorry, when you change a file in your app plugins that way and it copies it across, you don't need to reboot or rebuild Umbraco, because it'll just, if you've got your debug settings on, it'll automatically read the app plugins file. So you're not constantly rebuilding your project for app plugins changes to app plugin files. So I'm just going to sanity check what I'm doing here, which is, this is setting up this project. I just didn't do it the first time before we started. So this is just installing the Gulp on this project that does that file copy.
So you're going to extend this to copy to both websites?
I am, and I've got a copy of one because I'm not going to go through how we do it, but essentially that, hopefully, if I've got it right, we'll just check it runs inside there. So yeah, that's just copying files. It's quite small there, but it's copying them to the Umbraco examples website, but we want to copy them to both.
Yeah.
So my font's quite small in here, isn't it? That doesn't matter.
Just do Control++ and the whole Visual Studio code increases.
Oh, now you've made it ridiculous. I pressed it too many times. But yeah, so essentially this Gulp file copies using the paths from one source to another, but because we're going to cheat a little bit, not like that. We'll see. This is a near identical one that does it with two destinations. So if we make sure that that's got the right name, this is saying copy from the our Umbraco website app plugins to Umbraco examples.website and Umbraco UI examples V9 website.
I think it's case sensitive.
Not when I'm in Visual Studio and Windows, no, but there would be if we were running Linux. One of the things you do have to make sure is some of your files in there. I haven't tested this on Linux, but yeah, the file case of some of your app plugins folders is very important when you're on a Linux version of the same thing. So if I've got that right, what should happen is that app plugins has copied over to our V9 site. So you can see it's there, but we haven't actually built our V9 site yet. So I'm going to also, because I want to check runtime, I'm going to add a reference to the example project into that V9 site so you can see, because it's using the new format, you can see we've got an example. That means when we compile that, it will copy the DLL over from our site. And because it's a .NET 5 site, it will copy it over. So if we build the site, and hopefully didn't get errors, we got errors. I got not imported project will not confirm that expression in the import declaration is correct. I'm getting a weird website's target. I think I had this before and I can ignore it. I think it's the other project.
That was what it had added a build targets. It's trying to copy
stuff. It's added a build targets.
Yep.
It's this, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't give a reference to the same project.
Yeah, because I didn't really need to add it for this one. Still failed. I have a cycle.
Yeah. So you have a project reference to the actual...
A project that doesn't exist. So...
Oh, the one below.
You have the one to itself, that one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And run around.
That's what happens if you click the wrong box. That's good to know.
Oh, is that what that...
Yeah, what it did is it added a reference in this website to what would have been the projects that I could have told it that one, and it would have done that step for me.
Yeah.
That's essentially what would have happened. So now, hopefully, a web browser will pop up as if by magic, and we can install Umbraco 9, and it should have the project in it because I've referenced it, and that means we can check the runtime because obviously the site won't have booted up first time. You're just getting my standard everything passwords here. All right. While that installs, there's another thing which hasn't happened to me, but it'll catch it because I've fixed it. But if you don't do that, the fix it catches you out every time is when you multi-target, there's actually a bug with one of the way .NET 5 builds a multi-target in Visual Studio. And Matt has written the blog about it, which is when you build, you get an error saying that the Lucene analyzer files are missing, because in .NET 4.7 it's Lucene 3, and in Umbraco 9 it's Lucene 4, and the Umbraco 9 package has an analyzers folder, and for some reason Visual Studio looks for the analyzers folder in every version of .NET when it compiles, and you get an error. And you get an error saying it's missing the multi-target. Now, what I've done, because I did this before Matt found the actual proper workaround, is I copied the analyzer folder in my NuGet 4 folder to the NuGet 3 one, and everything works. What Matt says you should actually do is you should add this target to your project, which says don't use the analyzer folder of Lucene at all when you build the project. And so this is the workaround, because they're not going to fix it till .NET 6. If you fix it locally on your machine, it just works and you forget instantly, because you never have to do it ever again. But obviously, it doesn't then work in build processes or continuous deployment or anything like that unless you put these lines in. So what you should do is take these lines off Matt's blog and bung them into this project. And it just makes sure that the Lucene compiler doesn't get called. But in the meantime, I think we now have an Umbraco 9 site. I don't want to see the tour. So this is the Umbraco 9 site, and you can see it's got UI examples.
Which means the migration ran.
Which means the project works. We've got a version 4.5 and a version 9, a version 4 and a version 5, Umbraco 8, Umbraco 9 version of the project running. So that's all the code's done. So now in theory, all we have to do is package it up, which is super easy. So when you do a new project with the Umbraco project template, so if you were creating a new one, I've broken that by adding that thing, haven't I?
It's the closing anchor tag on the target.
It is. When you do a new Umbraco 9 project, which I have done a while ago, so let me just find one for reference. Umbraco 9. No, I did it the other day. When did I do it? Yeah, Umbraco 9 package. So I'm just going to open this in Visual Studio Code to show you there's a file. If you do this from .NET New Umbraco package, it sort of adds this for you, because we're migrating an existing package. We won't have this. In Umbraco, in .NET Core, files in a NuGet folder don't get copied automatically into a project. So if you put content app plugins in your folder like you would a version 8 Umbraco NuGet package, and they get built into the site, on a .NET 5 they don't. And so what the solution is, you have a targets file in your project that when you build it, when you install this package onto your Umbraco site, this target is added, and what it does is it copies your package app plugin files to the site. So you can see here, I've created an Umbraco 9 RC package, and it's basically done Umbraco 9 RC package content file path, and it copies them all. So if you were doing a .NET New Umbraco package, this file will be here. Because we're not, we need to add it. And so you can just take this file from an example template, and within this, which is still not loading, reload project, we're going to create that build folder. And we're going to add a new, sorry, I just need to remember, it's a .targets file, which is XML really. And we'll call it UI examples.targets. And then, because we've just copied this, all we need to know is ours is called UI examples. And if I take that bit, and we're just going to rename it in this file to UI examples. So now this file for us says copy everything from app plugins UI examples and then copy it to the project's app plugin UI examples. And that's the clear, and that's the build step. So if you do, that's wrong. If you actually run it, I think you might be able to see the output from when we ran it last time. If we build the site, you can see this happening for the Umbraco now, because Umbraco does the same thing. And if you build it in a command line, you can see it really well. But actually, what you see is that very small line there says copying files. That's copying the Umbraco static files, and we're basically adding our own version of that to copy our plugin files. So we need this file in our NuGet package to then copy those files. It's a bit convoluted, but it's a Microsoft NuGet-y thing. And so now that's got everything in it needs. We just need to build a NuGet package. And so what you can do is you can do a new spec file the same way that you would do with a thing, but what you can do is build the whole thing using the Visual Studio project thing, file format, as it were. And for speed, sorry, this is good. I will walk through this, but for the sanity and speed of it, these two sections will build this package. So these property groups don't have to be separate, but for sanity they are. So essentially all the stuff that you would have in a NuGet file you can put in here. So this is the package ID. This is the version, which we can also pass in the command line, but just you can put it in here. URL, license, the URL to the repo, any package tags. Again, the repo, that's the project URL, that's the repository URL. Description, some release notes. And then there's a couple of things about whether or not we embed the resources. So I don't think you necessarily need this one, but it tells you to embed the resources into the project. Include symbols means it'll build the symbols when we do a .NET pack, and it'll be a snoop. This is the name of the folder that our content's going in. So you can see down here, we're going to copy the app plugins folder into the package. It'll go into content app plugins. And then this is the bit where we put the build in. So we put the build script in as well. And it goes into a thing called build transitive, which in Umbraco documentation, there's 3 of these. You can go read what build transitive does, because I've read it 3 times and I don't know. It basically means it goes in at certain points of the build. There's like 3 or 4 different points in a build it goes in, and build transitive is the recommended one that it should go in. And then this is the same. I've just cut and paste over the top of the same package. So lots of detail there, but it's basically lifted from the same thing as last time. And if we haven't had enough command line, have we? So if we go into our UI examples and do .NET Pack, and if we've got everything right, we get a couple of warnings about build transitive. I don't know if that means because I've missed something off. Oh yeah, it does probably. But what we should have now, because we told it, because we did that with no command line options, it took everything from this file, and we told that to put it in an output folder, so we actually specifically put it in there. You can do that with the .NET Pack. You can put command line to say where things go, but we didn't. So what we have now is, if we got it right, is an output folder with 2 files. What are you doing? Getting bigger. One of these is the NuGet file, and the other is the NuGet symbols file, because that's what we asked it to do. When we did it, we said do a NuGet package and a symbols package. So this is the NuGet file. And just open it in here, you can see what we've got is the example targets. That is built as example targets. All our app plugins there with all the content in. And then 2 DLLs, so the .NET 4 DLL and the .NET 5 DLL. And that's the package. Don't want to necessarily test it, but it should work in theory. I don't know what that warning was. I'll probably have to dig out. I've just probably copied something wrong, but at least one of the targets files was not found.
They're complaining about the naming there. That it's
I think it probably is. I think I didn't give it the right name. So I think it has to have the same name as the project. It might be that it has to have the same name. I've called it UI examples to target, and I can't remember. I think it might It's actually created it. I found to have some issues with targets when you use things like Visual Studio Code versus Visual Studio because of how it builds. Not to build them, to install your package. It's very weird.
I think it's meant to be the same name as the NuGet package.
Yeah, and that's well, in theory, I think the NuGet package is the same name as the project. So, I mean, I've renamed it, and we can always see if it runs it and complains again. I'll pack again to see. It'll just overwrite it. There we go. No errors.
Whoop.
Yep.
Did we clap yet?
No, you don't.
Well, we haven't seen it working, but we.
Well, it works on the test site.
Yeah.
Works on my machine. So yeah, obviously now you could push that up somewhere and test it. And, it would in theory work, but it would need another test site. You just run an Umbraco test site up and see what happens. But we've taken nearly an hour, so.
Nice.
Should we assume it works, or we'll test it works and work out what's missing?
Probably should test it before we push it.
Oh, you want me to test? We'll test it before we push it. Yeah.
I mean, I hate to be a stickler. And all that.
You do. I'm not pushing it now because I haven't got permissions to push it. So.
Oh, what to NuGet? Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Leave that to Andy to be nice.
Yeah.
Or Warren. Maybe Warren has the power. Do you have the power, Warren?
Do I? I don't know.
This needs to end up in the Umbraco.
I haven't actually got it anywhere sensible to. It might be there, but I haven't got it anywhere sensible to see, so I might just copy them to a local GIF folder, so that otherwise I can't install them anywhere else.
I was looking really carefully for any secret package names. Translation manager.
Translation manager. Nothing secret. Yeah, I'm getting blindness now because it's probably not going to work. I haven't got all my package paths set up right. Also, I'm doing it in code. I don't know why I'm doing it in Visual Studio Code. What version do you think we called it?
2.00 beta something.
Yeah, it was called something silly, wasn't it? 2.00 beta 1. Yeah. I know you're complaining. Let's see if I've even got that close to right. So .NET. And see, you can see is it hasn't copied the files. So you should have seen the file there that said copying files. So for some reason, the target thing hasn't quite worked. And so I'll need to check that. But essentially there you would see an extra line that says copying your other files. So there is something wrong with the build transitive step because then you should expect them. And this is the bit where I found actually doing this in Visual Studio Code might be a thing. I found if you do it in Visual Studio, sometimes it works and then you do it in code, it doesn't, because actually that target goes into one of these random files in the bin in the object folder. So I can't remember which one it is. It's this. This is your targets. Your targets lives in object bin, which obviously you don't source control. And it hasn't added it for some reason. But it gets added to there and then it runs. And I found sometimes that doesn't happen in Visual Studio Code and does happen in Visual Studio. But I've never really had time to fully debug it. That might just be, it's really hard to debug this because things get cached. So when you're using .NET 5, that file is coming from your NuGet cache now, as opposed to in a .NET 4 project, you would expect to see a packages folder here with all of your NuGet packages in. But in reality, that now lives in your profile. So when you're debugging package development, a NuGet package that you may have done something wrong to, like I probably just have, it actually lives in can't even find my own name. in here, in here, there is a cache of all of your package files. And so if you go, oh no, I've got it wrong, you need to clear the cache out. And if you forget to, you can. And so there should be. There isn't actually that UI example. So that now lives there. So every time I now do a .NET restore, it comes from here, not from that local Git repository. And so you get sources. Oh,
I think it's -- list.
Yeah, and you do no.
Oh no.
You get source. That's why there's no S on it. It's cache I want. There's a NuGet cache. Oh, it's. Oh, I'm sure there is. Definitely gone off piece now.
In terms of clearing the cache.
Yeah, it's locals. If you do that, I mean, it slows everything down, but essentially, it will. If I go out of it, it should clear all your NuGet caches for you. Clears, you can see it's clear in that folder, and then you can update your package and then try again. No, that's the thing you have to be aware of with .NET 5 is, especially if you've messed your package up, is it can be cached, and you can spend 4 days going over updating your package. Why is it not working? And then there you go. See, the package folder's gone. Woot! But there's something wrong with the build step. I'm not going to fix it on a call, but I'll have a look, work out what it is. It's probably casing.
Can you show your PowerShell window again, Kevin?
That one, yeah.
It's got a little Umbraco logo.
It has got a little Umbraco logo,
Right.
and it's transparent. So if you go like that, you see you can start to see the background behind it, but only when it's not all black windows because everything's in dark mode. There you go.
Your little Umbraco logo.
Yeah.
Geek.
Nerd.
Where is it? Am I being really blind?
Down the bottom.
Right.
Oh my god. It's too subtle for my eyes.
It's subtle.
Do I get a prize for spotting it?
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks. That's right. Well, bang on time, Kevin.
Oh, there you go. That took an hour. It doesn't work. So.
But it's nearly there.
It's very nearly there.
And as you say, the code works. It's just the packaging bit, right?
See the temptation now. I'm going to have to go off and find out why.
You'll spot it just as we all.
I will.
Kevin. I couldn't see what it was. It looks right to me, but that must be.
Yeah, I honestly, I've had it a couple of times, and I think it's almost always you've got a very small typo somewhere. But you go around the houses, you forget to clear the cache 4 times, and then all of a sudden you're like, I'm sure this was working, and now I don't understand why it's working. And then it's So what I am doing is I've cleared the cache and I'm building it in Visual Studio to see if there's a difference, but I don't think there necessarily will be. No. But yeah. The computer doesn't like me doing this, it's taken off.
I have to run off because I need to eat something. Thank you so much, Kevin.
No worries. I need to eat too.
Yeah, food's a good idea.
Yeah.
Cheers, Sam.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Anyway.
I get that samples, but that's a Umbraco one. As an aside, actually, Warren, you might know this. You get this error about JSON files not being copied in Visual Studio.
Yes. Yeah. Now do a, because you've done a clean. Now do a build.
And it works.
Yeah.
I had a similar one in USync, and I just renamed it from a JSON file because it was only contained like a little bit of text I needed for UI, and I decided I didn't need it to be JSON.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, that's not working. Someone's broke that. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing because then I can play with that as a different thing.
A slightly tangential question. Package migrations.
Yeah, you could have gone that
I know you didn't use them. Just used the kind of the other migrations.
No, to be honest, I haven't really looked at package migrations, and I don't know.
I haven't much, but maybe you know, Warren, what's the reason for using the new one over? Because I know we can obviously use it for things like when we're installing content and you've got your package XML and we need.
So that would be a perfect scenario where you're doing all that stuff in terms of adding. So think of package migrations. Do you remember the package actions that we used to have in a package XML? That's probably the direct comparison. So where you're adding that user group or that section to that user group, that would probably make more sense to do it in a package migration.
Yeah.
But yeah, as with anything in code, can do it 101 different ways. There's no right or wrong answer. I
suppose with that one, I just lifted it because we were doing it from a migration
exactly,
anyway.
And you're
Didn't
doing
want to change the code.
if-defs and things like that.
Yeah,
so.
You would have it. I mean, I suppose it wouldn't underneath that little bit of code, you'd just separate out. So what I've done on bigger packages than that. So the thing we sort of skipped over logging because the login interface has changed, and I know Matt's done very similar things. Is you abstract away a couple of those things into your own classes so that you can then call them from two different places. So, example, you would extract the out section bit out of the code wouldn't live in the migration at all. It'd live in a helper and or a service of itself, and then you'd inject that into one and inject it into the other, so you've not got as many if defs. And so the main ones I've seen are login and also that boot. So when you add a service, which we didn't do, you do composer.add unique or register unique, and then 9 you do builder.services.register unique. But if you build an extension method for either like the version 7, your .NET 5 or 4 version, you can have the same method call, so you don't necessarily need an if def around your adding of all your services. So you if def the name, the compose line, and then your actual services are all registered the same way, but it's an abstract layer over it's just like an extension function over the top. So you don't end up with as many, but that project wasn't necessarily worth it because you'd end up writing. I think I've spoken to Matt because Matt's done more of this, and I keep trying to persuade him to make a open source like extension library to make some of this easier because you're just repeating the same bits of code again and again. So, and the main one's Logger.
Yeah. I guess it's just analogous to writing code in general, isn't it? Once you've written the same code 3 times, you think about, okay, this needs to be a helper.
Yeah, essentially. The big one is if you've got log anywhere, immediately you notice it because it's everywhere in your code that you've got like a logger debug line, and it's different in 7, in Umbraco 8 and 9.
Yeah, so having if defs.
You don't want if defs everywhere. You just got to abstract your log line away. It's probably the biggest one. And then.
I wonder how big a pool of people it is, though, who's going to be doing this multi-targeting, because I can't think in like agency lands.
No, but I think, as an example, that now, I mean, it took an hour, and I mean, admittedly, it took me an hour, and I didn't know what I was doing. But if you were starting from scratch with that project and converting it to an Umbraco 9 version of the project, independent of Umbraco 7, it would have still taken, 40 minutes to do in the same way. So 20 minutes longer, maybe let's say 20-30% longer up front. That's now any changes are multi-targeted. You don't have to branch and cherry pick and keep that in sync. It's now just one project, works for both all the time. Unless you're changing something that happens at the boot time, you're not going to change the code for that project. And so every time you multi-target a project, you've given yourself one maintenance tree at the end of it, which I think is why it's worth it. And I've done it on a project which has just got one controller in it and similar. So now that's done, I'm never going to have 2 versions of that package. I'm just going to have one version of the package for 2 platforms.
And for this one, especially, we do have plans to add more functionality to the app plugins folder.
Yeah.
But then we can just keep deploying it.
Essentially, yeah.
Both versions.
Yeah. Obviously, when the new UI arrives, it'll be different again, but that's not worth worrying about because it's not there, so we'll be fine.
Yeah, I just felt like we were ahead, and now I feel like we're at the bottom of the mountain again.
Everyone, I always say it, and I fall into it about the new UI. It isn't written yet, is it? So let's not worry about it. Stop mentioning it. So.
Yeah, I think there's a whole lot of use that we have out of what we are doing at the moment. Awesome. Thank you very much, Kevin, for doing that.
Yeah, very useful.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to press stop.
Okay.